there. And also there was Dr. Chu Ott, who's from Ogden. He's a whistleblower on satanic ritual abuse in the Mormon Church. And then there were a few other people that I felt were questionable, but they were there anyway. That was Ted Gunderson, who's a former FBI bureau chief, and Senator John DeCamp, who wrote the book The Franklin Cover-Up, and a few other people. But that's where I initially met her, and she, boy, what she has to say is you're not going to really find it out there, too much on the internet or in the media per se, but what she really delves into is sort of the hybrid cloning programming that she's believes that has gone on for thousands of years.
A lot of people dance around that, but I've never heard of someone who says they were involved in that on a personal level, so that's pretty sick. I see you got a new fall issue of Paranoia magazine dropping very soon, JFK and UFOs being a main story in that issue. You also have a story on Hollywood mind control, which seems appropriate to talk about today. What piece is that? Who wrote that one?
It's an article called Release the Stars, Babylonian Mind Control in the Entertainment Industry. And that's by Jamie Hanshaw, who's the girlfriend of Freeman, who a lot of you probably know. They put out a publication called Weird Stuff. But she's been investigating that area of mind control in the entertainment industry and in Hollywood for a number of years. And so she sort of gets into the music videos and certain individuals that were connected with the Disney Corporation. And you find some very interesting connections and correlations that are very dark and demented. It may seem theoretical to a lot of people, but when you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together, it makes a lot of sense. How Hollywood or the entertainment industry is used as a means to control the masses, in a subliminal way.
Yeah, I've heard Freeman talk about just even the term Hollywood. Holly used to be is what they use to make a wizard's wand, and basically, Hollywood is just casting one big blanket spell over the country. Well, man, it's about that time. I think Elisa's probably waiting for us. We're a little late to this party, so I'm going to play this Conspiracies ad for everyone's favorite conspiracy-themed clothing company. We've heard it 1,000 times. Maybe one more will do the trick for you, and then we'll be talking with Elisa on the other side.
We're here because we don't buy into the bullshit of mainstream culture. We're tired of the mundane, passionless careers we've been shuffled into as a result of this orchestrated debt-based system of rule, and the stranglehold on education and entertainment by cold, soulless corporations. People, yes, we are frustrated. Yes, we are tired. And we reject the pre-approved tranquilizers that are Monday Night Football and an ice-cold Budweiser. But we have to stop hiding. Stop hiding behind the headphones and the Cherry Popper 420 username. Let the world see that the resistance is strong and society is changing. There was a time to be anonymous, but that time has passed. And so the Higherside Chats would like to present Conspiracies as the dawning of this new paradigm in the uniform of the revolution. Because bold fashion should mean more than some celebrity meat dress or frat boy in a silly pink polo. Conspiracies redefines bold fashion as having the balls to reject socially uncomfortable and unpopular truths from your radiant chest. All fucking day. Conspiracies.net. Let them know that you know. Bold designs for troubled times. Hard truths. Soft cock.
Welcome back, people. Most of us have heard the stories of secret CIA mind control programs like MKUltra and underground networks of systematic trauma, both sexual and psychological, to program people from a young age for various purposes. Everything from being the new pop culture cash cow for the Hollywood elite to programming triggers deep into the subconscious to create patsies or puppets for mass public shootings and targeted assassinations. Well, folks, today we have a woman known as Elisa who claims to have been a very real victim of such programming and abuse. She's written about the programming, her experiences, and her deeper thoughts on how far these missions go in her two books, Our Life Beyond MKUltra, Volumes 1 and 2. Elisa, I am so psyched you're here. We got plenty of time. I think it's really important to give you a minute so you can tell the people your personal backstory. I mean, obviously it's been very traumatic, but I know a lot of the listeners really want to understand the details of what happens to the victims of these types of programs. And you're really in a unique position to give those details, so if you wouldn't mind, please walk us through this timeline of manipulation.
Sure, Greg. Thank you again for giving me and us the opportunity to come on. And I may, just to start, I may just mention that I usually speak in the I now, but sometimes I say we. So if I go back and forth, I'm referring to me and my alter personalities. I was born in 1962, and the reason I like to throw the year out is because with programming, there are kind of like spans of years that will help determine where the technology was for certain groups of people. You know, if you were born in the 50s, it may have looked somewhat like this, or if you're born in the 60s, the 70s, and so forth. And with each decade, or even I think shorter spans of time now, the methods and the technology that they're using does change. What I went through is very much upgraded these days. It's a whole different ball game. The technology allows that. And what some of the people went through in the years prior to my programming, they also went through slightly different. But as you probably already know, there's some baselines that go kind of across all of them. There are certain things that are common base programming for a lot of us. A lot of the themes and so forth, of course, change over the years. I was born in New Jersey. My first programming memories, or I should say my first abuse memories, are actually pre-verbal. And I'm going back and forth between not being able to breathe and then being able to breathe and crying and so forth. And I do dissociate. We can relive some of my memories and have over the years, and particularly since 2008. I don't want to get ahead of myself, but
Sure.
I stayed under use in programming despite being aware that something was going on and even trying to get some help. I spent most of my life there until I was 46. My memories had been breaking through for decades, but there was really nowhere to go. Mental health community, I kind of got passed off and medicated and reprogrammed, which is really just a reinforcement for most existing programs, plus they can add enhancements, and was continued to be used until 46 when I met a couple of men in Salt Lake City. It was at great risk that I went to meet them, which is a story in and of itself I won't go into. But I knew I was going to die soon, and it felt imminent, and I even had the understanding that it may be me who did it. And that did turn out. I do have a couple of, at least 2 suicide programs. And I met them, and it was the first time in my life that I just said, you know, you're probably going to tell me I'm crazy, but I spent like 2 days telling them everything. I said, don't tell me anything. Let me just tell you what's there. And at the end of it, these 2 men looked at me and said, not only do we believe you, we've worked with other people like you. And that was the floodgates opened.
Wow.
It was the first time that I was safe, and basically almost all of my alters that were willing to came forward and started telling all their stories, and the memory started flooding into my conscious mind. Me being one of what I call the frontline people who was to present to the world, look like a very normal, very high functioning. I've always been very high functioning, very intelligent, and yet what I call the main front altar, never knew about the others. And there was a group of us up front that took care of whatever needs we had, and basically the idea was to prevent me from ever really realizing what was inside, no matter what showed up. And so in April of 2008, that all changed. And it was the safety factor. It was that I'd met people who knew, and I was safe for the first time ever, or so I thought. Deprogramming has its own pitfalls, its like kind of like a minefield, but there were people who said, we'll help you.
So, Elisa,
Yeah.
this is Ron. I first met you back in 2009, in Ogden, Utah, and you had mentioned that you read my article, Project Monarch, Nazi Mind Control, and that kind of resonated with you in a lot of ways. And so the type of programming that you went through, and everybody's programmed differently depending upon, what their abilities are. Would you say that you were heavily programmed with, what they refer to as beta and delta programming?
Yes, my apparently, I don't know when this was determined or if it was by design right from the start. And I will just interject here real quickly. This is really hard for, I understand, the average person to understand what's really going on at this time and even back in the 60s in these ultra-black projects. But I believe there was intervention right from the get-go, even preconception.
Preconception. Can you kind of give the details of that?
Sure. What I mean by preconception is that it was with me, and I'm apparently not even remotely the only one this happened to, but their interference in designing us right from the get-go. I believe at that time, I call it preconception, meaning genetically. Things were altered, things were put in place, enhanced. But I believe now, I should say more than believe, I know nowadays they can do it post-conception. They can do it after birth.
So you think you were born with this mission, with this program in mind?
I'm not sure exactly how much of it, specifics-wise, was in mind, but I'm certain that I was, in my birth, the whole bit was planned.
Wow.
Yeah.
And for people who might not be, who this might be a little bit foreign to them.
Sure.
We're talking about fragmented personalities, alters. How does this programming start? Like, what are the details of what actually goes on? Because I hear about it in broad strokes quite often, but what really happens? What are some of your earliest memories of this kind of manipulation?
Well, kind of like I'll go back to first what Ron asked about beta and delta, and I learned about those words afterwards. I have memories of a delta triangle, which is an equilateral sided triangle, and I didn't know those words. I didn't know beta and delta. What I discovered after revealing my memories was that I had those types of programming. And my main uses, just to start, were sexual uses and kill programming. And more often than not, were used together, using the sexual programming to gain access. And then the kill alters would surface in whatever way was deemed necessary at the time and in the particular case.
Well, so that means you would seduce a target, get them alone, and then carry out a kill program?
Well, yes and no. Sometimes it appears from my memory, my particular alter memories, that not only I wasn't necessarily sent in to seduce, that it was pre-planned. Even the target knew that I was, going to perform sexually for him. And in some cases, what I came to realize, and you have to understand, when I say flooding of memories, it doesn't do it justice. As a matter of fact, in my opinion, from what I've seen in my deprogramming, the flooding is also intended to overwhelm the victim, and often a lot of people don't survive that process, either mentally or physically. And when I say flooding, it's many alters bringing many pieces forward, some of them bringing numerous stories forward. And after a period of time, I began to see that there were very specific things over and over for certain alters. Very particular alters behaved in certain ways and had certain programming and were used by, certain people for very particular things. And one of the things I saw was that one of our main uses, at least with two of my kill alters, was to actually take out members of the network. And
wow.
so I think they knew I was there, it appears. They were waiting for me for the sexual use, but they didn't know that I had kill programming.
So it seems more like a situation where, to get a context, a broader context
Yeah.
for this, what's going on behind the scenes. You do see a lot of politicians getting caught up in prostitution scandals or, these child sex abuse rings, like Jerry Sandusky's ring that apparently was leasing kids to high-profile clients. Is this the kind of the situation that you were in, and then you also just had these triggers that would, because obviously you're attracting high-profile clients, which could also be those same targets for these people. So then they switched, they flipped a switch and it went into a kill program?
Exactly. And of course, in almost every case, there's one case I'm not really certain about, but in every case that I've been shown, I should say, it was a case of the programming was in place prior to my even going out and engaging with these individuals. But within the network, slaves are used extensively, and age doesn't matter. They're using very small children all the way up to, whatever age. I mean, generally there's just like in what I call the world of men, which is the world everybody else lives in, there's a certain age where, you move back to the younger people. Women hit a certain age and they're not considered as attractive anymore. So, but within that, from childhood on up, I mean, the heaviest use of sex slaves in that regard is within the network.
Yeah,
so it's easy to set someone up to take a fall if they've, there's a variety of reasons. They've begun to show signs that they don't want to do what they're doing anymore, or they're getting ready, they get older and they're getting ready to talk about something or write a book, or they've said something they shouldn't do, or they just piss somebody off. Mm-hmm. And, then their usefulness is no more. And it can be used in a couple of ways. A lot of times there's more of it going on that people don't even see. When it becomes a public issue, most of the time it's not a public issue. When it becomes a public issue, it's very clearly meant to send a message to the rest of the people in the network. Stay in line, or we'll come for you too.
Man, see, that's what I think is interesting because, I've tried to think about these type of stories and, see if it makes sense. A part of me is like, well, why wouldn't you just get a highly trained assassin and just shoot someone? But when you think about the security involved and the secrecy involved in a situation where you would be a high-level person in the Illuminati's network and you're, having sex with children, the type of security in that environment would also be very conducive to getting rid of that person, if they were showing signs of wanting to do something different or if they had talked too much or something like that, because they're going to feel extremely comfortable. Like that's not something that goes on in everyday life. So you have to create a safe room for that type of environment. So that very same safe room is also convenient to trigger someone into killing that person off and then being able to do it in secrecy. So that does make sense to me.
Yeah, and that's really exactly. I mean, early on for most people, when they're first few times, where they engage in the scenarios you're talking about, there is, films are made and so forth as insurance later, and a lot of these people wind up in the network, basically being blackmailed. But you have to remember that doesn't condone and make them solely a victim. They become, every perpetrator is a victim first. Seriously, and that's really hard for people to get wrapped around, but you have to victimize someone for them to do the things that the perpetrators do, and I know that from firsthand experience. My victimization is very real, but it's the very thing that made me a perpetrator, working for them. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I've been curious. I don't know how comfortable you are discussing your experiences as a child, but are these situations, I mean, obviously there's pretty typical sexual abuse, but I've heard stories that they are more ritualistic, there's more occult aspects to them. They aren't just straight what you'd expect. Have you experienced any weirdness that you could share with us?
Oh, yeah. And, it's really, I don't mind talking about it, and a lot of it, I'll just say, is in both books 1 and 2. Basically, I set up the books as much of a chronology as I could. You have to understand, one of the things that happened for me was my sense of time. It's almost non-existent, linear time. And so it took a lot of energy to try to, as memories came forward, to begin to piece them into some chronology. And just so you know, I set up book 1 to basically be a cross-section of the early years on through my youth years. And that's to kind of qualify me so that people understand, there's a reason to listen to what I have to say in book 2. And then in book 2, I kind of, there's some more stuff by the time I finished book 2. There was more information, which I kind of have an update section in the beginning. So I'm updating on some of the stuff that was in book 1 and with greater understanding. And then I get into how I began to wake up, how I got help, what I do now, what I consider to be deprogramming. So that kind of gives you a view. That's why there's 2 books. And
okay.
Early on, what I have, even, let's see, I'm now, what is it, 5 years in? Is my math right? Yeah, it's just over 5 years into what I call deep deprogramming, and that began the day that I met these 2 men. What has come forward is literally hundreds of fragments, maybe, I would say hundreds, from various altars. I'm still uncertain how many altars I have, but it numbers really high. And I'll just kind of start here, and then we'll go into what you're asking about programming. Sure. They were created over a period of time, many years. Here's the thing to understand: even once you're in your youth years, what I call the heavy youth years, you're still actually creating altars because of what you're doing. So they're not necessarily being programmed, but your mind is still fragmenting. So this helps people, the average person, to understand how some people can claim so many altars. And what we're talking about, too, when we're talking about altars is there's full personalities, and there's what I call fragment personalities. And I've met many of both, for me, more fragments than full personalities. And the difference is that a full personality, if that personality, which they don't do this anymore, no altars to my awareness take over my body fully or my mind. I coexist with various parts of me. There's always more than one of us present, and nowadays. And the full personalities, back then, during the bad years, if a full personality took over, that altar could actually interact in the world at large around them. You would notice that there was something different about me, but I could still function very well and do what I needed to do. The fragments aren't always that way. Sometimes many of the child altars are fragments, and when they come up, they have no consciousness of the world around them. They don't understand life. They don't understand where they live or don't live. They have just a very fragmented view of their world. And unfortunately, with the child altars, it's just always really hard because it's either very sexual or pain-filled. And then there's adult altars that are also used for ritual purposes, like you're talking about. I believe I have encountered, to some degree, 2 of those, some of them to a frightening degree, in my deep deprogramming, where I was still conscious and they did take over my body, my vocal cords, everything. And I had a really hard time pulling it out, getting back to, right mind. As a child, most of it's really fragmented. There are partial memories. There was a lot of sexual abuse and incest. My father he was a multiple himself, and I don't know how and why he became involved. I don't know the particulars of that. He has passed some years ago. But I have a memory, I don't know who was doing this, like I started to say earlier, of being an infant, being preverbal, and screaming, crying, and then my mouth is stretched wide open, but I can't breathe. I can't scream. I can't make any sound. I can't take breath in. And then it goes back and forth between my screaming, crying. And I'm relived this In recent years, in a full adult body, I was laying on my back in my bed, and if anybody looked at me, I was moving like an infant. And I was co-conscious while this was being shown to me by this young child. And I dissociated in the memory, just completely shut off, just staring and feeling nothing and empty inside. It's kind of hard to explain it, but it's like you just lose connection to everything around you. And then my next memory is at 3 years old, and this one's very significant. I was in New Jersey. This is 1965, and it's not like I'm waking up. It's like when my alters showed me memories, the memory would start wherever their consciousness took over. So you could already be well into whatever was going on. It's when they wake up and when they leave, it ends. So I may have a scenario where I'm in a ritual, but I only have a piece of the ritual because there's only one altar who showed me their part of it. So the rest of it is not shown to me. Does that make sense? It's like coming in,
Absolutely.
And catching chapter 5 of the book and not getting the rest of the chapters. And it took a long time to realize what was happening, and so that I could begin to piece things together. And then maybe months later, another altar would show another part of that incident or another one, and sometimes I'd figure out that, 8 months later, now I've got another piece of that one particular episode. And at 3, I become aware that I'm very dissociated. Most of the times when I become aware, I'm very unemotional, just kind of existing. And I'm in a warehouse, a very large, I call it a warehouse. It looks like a warehouse. I don't know what it was, but it was huge. And I'm looking down at about a 40, 45 degree angle. There's a man below me, and it's kind of hard to describe because I'm working from their consciousness, the altar's consciousness. But he's a little bit below us, and he's been beaten badly. He's in what I call Navy denims. They were actually Navy issue, and there's blood all over him. And there's something screwed into his head, the side of his left side of his head, and there's a chain attached to it, and I still can hear the chain on this, it's like a twin bed with no sheets on it, an old metal frame. I can still see the mattress, and as he moves, this chain just kind of rubs along the metal on the side of the bed. And he's really out of it, and with that, I'm looking at him, and way off to my right, I hear voices of men coming, and they come around some very high metal shelves, which are on the opposite side of this man. And I realize at that point that whatever those shelves are, I'm on the same thing on the other side of this man. And I think I know what it is that I'm on, but for now I just call it shelves. It's just really hard for me to go there. And so these guys, there's 4 of them, and they appear around the corner, and they're coming in our direction. And my altar very unemotionally knows that they're coming to finish him off. And then, they approach, and it goes blank. And then another one of my child altars just tells me some things about it, doesn't show it to me. It's like I have, sometimes I have an understanding. They won't present it visually, but they'll tell me. Another altar will say, pick up where it left off and say, then this happened.
So, Elisa, I was wondering, as you know, I've spoken to quite a few MKUltra survivors over the past 21 years, and a lot of them have talked about having out-of-body experiences. Now, is this something that sort of coincide with remote viewing, or is this just something that's random? Can you kind of elaborate on that?
Well, first of all, when I began deep programming, I realized that I basically exist out of my body. I've spent very little time in it. Due to the years of programming and then use, and actually learned that getting in my body was extremely uncomfortable. It was very painful, and I've overcome a lot of that now. So, I think most people think of out of body as, just on a psychic level, an astral plane, which it is, but there's states of being that I think a lot of people really don't fully exist in their bodies. So there's varying degrees in there. They're very extreme. I mean, the low line is, the typical mild dissociation where you're driving to work. You drive every day, but you don't remember your trip when you get there. Everybody does that. That's a form of dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
But in programming, it goes to the extreme, and you can basically live on the outskirts of your body. You're not ever really fully in your body, and that's where I existed. There are experiences where, and this might get a little challenging for the average person, but not only was I used in a very, what we would call a three-dimensional physical use, like, send me to that motel room and do this job, but they also used me outside of my body, meaning you would be, pulled out, which is really easy because you're existing on the outskirts anyway, and you would be utilized in a very, very esoteric way. Not only, and this is where it gets a little weird for people, but not only in this dimension, but crossing in and out of other dimensions. And I do have fragmented memories of that same thing, where I'm not on this earth at that time, not as we see it. There's something else going on. I'm in a completely different place.
Wow.
And in deep deprogramming, even now, it's ongoing, meaning I'm in charge of it, but I'm still engaging with a variety, I call them windows, of other times and places, other timelines, and I'm actually even interacting with other beings still. They are continually trying to regain access, is the way I see it, regain control. So it's not just a human thing. There are other beings involved in this whole process, and they are cross-dimensional and of obviously malevolent intent. So, I mean, I'm talking full consciousness here, where I can consciously open a window, and I've had beings pop into those windows, and, I mean, look me right in the eye, and you can feel it. You are interacting with something that's alive and real, just not in this three-dimensional realm.
Man, yeah, that's what I really wanted to try to understand. That's kind of what I meant by weirder aspects or occult aspects, because you hear these stories that the highest levels of the elite, they're abusing children and people to harness some type of energy, not only just to display power, but also to harness some type of energy or some demonic force from the abused. And this is like a really foreign area for me. It's hard to wrap my head around, but this seems to be kind of like what you're talking about with different entities, different dimensions. Are these experiences with entities and dimensions, were these experiences within some type of ritual in a room full of high-level elite, or when did these things occur?
Well, that's part of it as well, yes. And, I mean, what a lot of people don't understand is, I think a lot of people don't understand it, in our experience, is that ritual isn't just used to fragment a child's mind, who they're programming. That's part of it. It's very real. It will, a horrendous, and it's called horrification in many cases. I mean, what they're doing is to horrify and split the mind, but the main use of this is to connect with these other malevolent energies, entities, beings, for power. That's what this stuff is all about, really, in my opinion. And it's kind of like we go to war to gain access to a certain region or zone, but the side benefit is they can make a lot of money doing it. It's kind of nothing that I know of that my programmers do is for one purpose. There's always multiple purposes for everything they do, but the main purpose, as far as I can see, in my own personal experience, is to usurp and maintain control over the entire human energy field. And that goes for everyone, not just someone like me. And so, yes, that's very real. And yes, it can be done and is done extensively in rituals. But when you understand what the technology is today, I mean, I was born in 1962. I know in the 1980s I met my own clones, or I should say I became aware of them. I met one of them. Wow. And I know how many there were. I know how many are left. And so the technology, that was in the late 80s that mine were brought online. I don't know when they were actually designed. They weren't designed at my birth, I know that much. Right. So here we are in 2013, and the stuff I would talk about now, people would think I'm talking about science fiction. So when you understand where it is now and where that energy we're talking about actually resides, which is very much in the technology of today, our computers, our cell phones, these are access points. I mean, these beings are living in an energy that they can travel with that kind of energy. They don't have to take the same form. We have to break our mold in our mind of what we think is possible and, what we've been told is possible and not possible. I know this. I mean, I know it. I know things that I experienced, bits and pieces, and most of it. The reason I couldn't get help was because people said, well, that's not possible.
Well, it's interesting what you're saying because, as you know, I used to work with Fritz Springmeier years ago, and a lot of his information actually is I think is up front and incredible, although there are other aspects about it that's problematic. But that's when I first heard about the whole cloning thing, and I realized that there is the technology exists to do it, and it's probably been done for years, and the motivation behind it as well. So to me, it's not a foreign thing. It's not like something that's way out there. But another thing that I find interesting, too, is that I remember watching The X-Files, and there was a couple of episodes where they had the whole cloning thing, and it was like, whoa.
Right.
When you look at some of those old X-Files now and, you hear about some stories like yours and others, it's kind of like Chris Carter, he was onto something, You just kind of wonder where he got a lot of that information from.
Absolutely. And, the cloning issue, as with so many other issues within what I call the blackest of black projects, the DARPAs and the NROs and all the alphabets that don't get as much attention. The forerunners are the ones that are in the public eye, like the CIA and now, of course, the NSA. You can be assured that if they're catching heat, they are in the game big time. But if they're catching the public heat that they've been catching for so many years, they've already long had these other agencies that you probably don't even know about. And those are the ones running the blackest of black projects. And I really, really believe, I've heard many different versions of how far, here's our current tech. In other words, this is the way I judge the current tech. If you go into, say, Scientific American or some technology magazine and you read articles and they tell you what's going to be coming out in X amount of years, that's a gauge of add about 50 to 100 years onto what they're talking about is going to happen at 50 to 100 years in the black projects.
Wow.
And that's just in this age, meaning in this point in human history. This is not new. This is, if you go back and study various civilizations, ancient civilizations, I mean, there's actual physical proof on this earth that things have been done over and over. And to me, what those beings are attempting is a very particular ultimate control. That's what this is really all about. And they've come close over and over, but what happens is almost like an implosion. They can't quite succeed, and they take out a region and come close to wiping out what they had their hand in creating. But this is done over and over. But in this age, go to the highest tech magazine, read what they're talking about that is coming in the, relatively 10 to 15 to 20 year future. Add 50 to 100 years to that. And that is what's actualized, not necessarily being worked on. It's actualized in the blackest of black projects. That's where the money goes. And I'm not the only one reporting this. It's really hard because when you come forward, the context of the average person is so far removed from this. As one person said, it's divorced, completely divorced from the reality of mind control. And but there's others that have come forward. Some of us, when we come forward, here's the thing to remember: a lot of us are still being used. It's, I had this saying: once MK Ultra, always MK Ultra. And what I mean by that isn't that you can't wake up and take charge of your life, but you have to stay constantly, rigorously self-honest every day, because they have an automatic in. And a lot of people can be used, to disinform. And I know of one person I won't name that came forward and talked about his clones, and then he recanted and said it was something else. And this guy is so programmed. I mean, it's just so obvious. But he's in the public sector and has been now for a few years. So,
right, Elisa. Yeah, we've talked about that before. There's a lot of MK Ultra survivors who are putting out, their stories, whether it be on the internet or in books. And it seems, unfortunately, a lot of the stories are conflicting, or appears to have a certain amount of disinformation or misinformation, or even possibly cross-contamination. What's your take on a lot of the survivors that are coming out and telling their stories?
Well, my first thing I want to say is that I thank them immensely, because every story I have read or seen a video or whatever at this point, which I didn't do early on, I want to say I waited a certain amount of time until a ton of my own information had already come forward. But now I find it helpful. I get a lot of corroboration, validation from other stories, as I'm sure works for all of us. But so I really want to thank them, because it takes a lot of courage to come forward and tell a story that makes you sound like you're crazy to the average person. Secondly, anything that I would say about, in general about other people with misinformation and disinformation also applies to me, meaning we all have to stay rigorously honest, and it's really difficult. And, I mean, if any of us are running at 65, 75% truth, excellent. I mean, seriously. All of this stuff is compartmentalized. All of it's, going to be just based on one person and all their alters experiences. And so, I've been misled by my own alters. I've had that case happen where I would discover, months or a year later that who she really was, and that she was coming up to try to muddy the waters. So it's a constant, ongoing, rigorous honesty. But I think it's important to realize that I realized this in my own case, that even in deprogramming, it's kind of planned. In other words, when you start to wake up, if you survive the process, there's a already preset, like the first thing to show up was all these child alters who flooded my mind with all this information. And what they have is incredibly important, but at the same time, they're young and they're extremely emotional. And so someone witnessing it would think I was crazy. And then after that, the older alters started to show up. But they plan on you not surviving this process. So in the beginning, you just look like you're totally flipping out and having a total mental breakdown. But if time is allowed to occur and you can stay sane and keep going forward, you'll start to see that it's actually very informative, and it takes a set schedule as information starts to appear. So it's really important to me personally that I stay very vigilant and not present stuff that is false or misleading or whatever. And that goes for all of us. I won't single myself out of that group, but I think we all just have to, and I think a lot of survivors know that. I've seen, cases where people have come forward and written books, and then a few years later, even they are making some corrections to their own programming and what they revealed. So it applies to all of us to just stay really honest. And that goes for, the researchers too. Don't be afraid to say, it's not what I thought.
Well, I mean, it's definitely some pretty fringe material. It's not something you hear in the mainstream, but I've heard it plenty in the underground. One thing I was curious about and wanted to ask you about your personal story, how did you break free? How were you able to deprogram? Did you have to escape handlers? I mean, because you would think people would want to protect their investment. So how did you get out of their clutches?
Well, I'll be really, really honest and vulnerable here in this. And, when someone asks me, why haven't they killed you? My response is they are. And I'm having a physical and mental and spiritual degradation and that goes on all the time, particularly physically. I'm in pretty rough shape. And I never really feel like I know how much time I have left. I call upon, at the suggestion of one of the men I met in 2008, I call upon what I call benevolent, unconditional, creative love. Just that highest, completely unconditional, non-judgmental form of love. And it's a force that I've gained a conscious relationship with. And it doesn't keep me from being harmed and doesn't make me invincible in body or mind. But in spirit, it does protect me. I'm not a religious person. I have a lot of issues with religion for a variety of reasons in my programming and use. But this force is very real. And I don't mean to be evasive or non-committed in trying to describe it. It's just really hard to put into words.
Sure.
But I started calling upon it early on, and I kept doing it, and I've actually had very physical experiences where it worked, meaning whatever was going on had to stop. Whatever was being projected onto me by this malevolence had to disappear for that period of time. And it's something I have to exercise consistently, daily, and before I go to sleep at night. Again, when I wake up in the morning. So I'm not invincible. I believe that I will ultimately die of this, meaning I will leave the body in some diseased, awful form, and I'm laughing because it's just ridiculous, But as far as them, trying to take me out, that did happen on a couple of occasions. And one of them, I got a really clear message, get out now. And I thwarted, the program that was about to take place. And that's happened more than once, and it was very, very sobering. I realized this was early on, and I realized what I was up against. And yes, the physical handlers, ultimately that became, when I was strong enough, became a spiritual issue as well. Even well over a year into my DP programming, they were still showing up. I came to the town I'm living in right now, and there were two of them waiting for me. The first one moved in as a friend, within the first 2 weeks. And it took me, this is how it works. When you're accessed, it took me a good year and a half to be strong enough to see it clearly enough to spiritually disconnect so that person couldn't access me anymore. And I kid you not, two months later, he came to me and he was leaving town. And I don't know if the two are related, but I certainly believe they were. He was being called back to Maryland, back to intelligence headquarters. But so it's not like it stops when people, I don't feel like I get out. I feel like I'm managing my life in a way that I can't be used anymore, and I'm minimizing to the best ability I can the accessing.
Man.
I'm of right mind now. I'm of right mind, even though my body is having a lot of trouble. My mind is mine, and but I have to stay ever vigilant.
Yeah, it sounds pretty exhausting. But who are these people? There's a lot of debate about how long we've been under the control of the same elite families who hold, this esoteric and occult knowledge. And some suggest this type of mind control is not a new development, that it's like ancient knowledge. It's been used in secret societies for possibly thousands of years. Do you have any insight into that through your interactions with these programmers?
I sure do. And when I say the programmers, I'm talking about those beings. The men and women that were part of my programming, controlling, and handling use, and those who hired me out for in whatever way are the human version, but there is definitely a very truly malevolent evil force that takes the form of beings that is running this. And my answer to your question is it's eons old. And when you really get to see it, it's actually cyclical. This has been going on over and over, and it looks different in each age, but it's the same thing at work. And there is an ultimate goal, as I mentioned in the beginning of this show, and that is to control the entire human populace, not to kill it, not to take it out, to minimize it, but to control all forms of energy, which is something that they really like. I don't know if it's necessary for them, but it's something they very much enjoy, and I believe they don't, as malevolence, they don't have access to on their own. And so I believe we were usurped or co-opted. Humans are a very benevolent species, spiritually, and what we're looking at, the way we are, is not what we started as. They co-opted, they came in, and they made some changes even genetically many, many, many years ago. And in my opinion, that's what's happening again now. We're talking 5 to 6 figure numbers of years later. They're making a big push right now with sound and light technology, which is what they used back then, and this transhumanism, which is the next move of genetic manipulation, which is what they used back then. And the goal is ultimate, complete, and utter control. And the really scary part is, are we running out of time too, you guys? I don't know what time it is.
No, but basically I just wanted to touch upon something briefly. When I was visiting you about a year and a half ago, we watched this video documentary on Ray Kurzweil and transhumanism. So is that what you're kind of alluding to in terms of this process of how humans are changing or combining, robotics and utilizing nanotechnology to create a whole different type of entity?
Yes. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And Kurzweil is the public face, and he's extremely high level and a very, very, very dark and dangerous man. But he's like everybody else. I mean, it's not one person or just one certain group. This is a massive global network, and what they're really pushing for, and this is the scary part, is it's not just for people like me anymore. They want it for everyone. They want it for you and your kids and your dog and your cat and the plants and the trees, and that's what the nanotech is about. That's what the chemtrails in part are about. It's about changing everything from what it is naturally into a biotech, an organic tech. It's not going to be the real deal anymore. And that's what nanotech is going to do if we don't stop this. And it's coming to everybody's home. And the scary part is that their goal is to mind control everyone, but they're not going to do it like they did with me so that it's obvious the method. You're just going to get up one day, and everybody's going to be under it, and no one's going to know it happened. And that is the version that they're working on. They have not actualized it in a mass scale, but they're still experimenting. But there are people, absolutely, not a lot, but there are people who have literally been uploaded. Their mind is now living inside AI. And this is mostly for the high-level victims and high-level dissidents. I know I don't want you or me to name the person, Ron, that I'm thinking of, but she went after someone in the 90s, right? And they decided to I'm absolutely convinced that what she's relaying is not in the least bit delusional. Based on my own experiences, she's trying to relay that she's living in hell. And and it sounds crazy. It sounds like she lost her mind. She did, but she didn't. Her mind is elsewhere. Right,
and then there's an investigative journalist, a writer, conspiracy writer, who personally told me the same thing back in, when was this? I think it was 2008. He talked about, and this is before I read the Deciphering the Matrix and the Soul Catcher book by Dr. Robert Duncan. He told me...
Glad you mentioned those, yeah.
Right. He told me that he can no longer write about mind control. He can write about political stuff, but he said that he's uploaded now, so everything he senses is being manipulated, recorded. So basically his eyes, his perception of what's going on can be altered just drastically. But he's sort of like a human recording device, too, wherever he goes, and sometimes he'll say things that he doesn't really mean, but he has no
Yes.
control over that. So everything,
It-
and it was very disheartening for him, and I know that over the past couple of years he's just been sort of just wandering about, but he's trying to get back into, writing again. But again, he only has so much control about what he can put out, and this individual was my hero back in the 90s. I mean, he was the consummate conspiracy writer, and he was writing about mind control. And the interesting thing, too, is he was exposing the same person as the woman you were referring to. So that's the commonality they have. They were exposing this person, and boom, all of a sudden they get uploaded.
So what they've got going, and by the way, everything you just talked about, what that guy told you, I also shared in 2008 when I sat down with these two men. I looked at them, I said, I know how this is going to sound, but everything through my eyes and ears is being recorded. And I said, I have no idea how they do it. They looked at each other and said, we'll go under that assumption. They used the word shunt at that time. That was their version of it. But now as you have access to the patent. This is real technology. Mm-hmm. And I knew it. I knew it was happening, and I didn't know how to dismantle it. I have since spiritually dismantled it, and I'm absolutely certain that it can't facilitate anymore. It's hard to explain, but you feel it. But what this person's talking about, they can, for the average person, you're not going to have to live in that hell. They're going to create a life that you won't even know you've switched. You won't even know you've been uploaded. It'll look like your life. It will look like a normal so-called life. Mm-hmm. But for those who are high-level, want to get rid of them, don't talk, or dissidents, or researchers who have gone after the wrong person, they can design in these programs basically a hell, and they can upload you there. So that's the punishment version. Mm-hmm.
Man.
Crazy stuff, I know. I mean, it sounds crazy until you've been far enough in it. When you've been in and you come out, you have a piece of the truth. And remember that. Anybody who's been in it and comes out has part of it. We all have part of the truth. None of us has it all.
I mean, I do appreciate you sharing the story. A couple of other things I wanted to ask you about was, a lot of people throw the MK Ultra label around pretty loosely in the conspiracy community, but when you look at people like Sirhan Sirhan or Mark David Chapman or even this John Holmes of the Dark Knight shooting, people claim that they're a victim of these things. Do you see some characteristics that are consistent with what you've experienced in them?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, to me, basically, darn near everyone that's in the public now that has perpetrated these various acts, these are all absolutely all mind controlled. And when you understand what the technology is now, they don't have to take someone from the beginning. They're still doing that. They're always going to do trauma-based mind control. And they're gonna always genetically work in there, and there's always going to be groups of higher level slaves. But in the general populace, they can pick anyone, any age, and come after them. And they look for very particular precursors that signify that this would be a good candidate. They'll test some out, some don't work as well, so they drop them and they move on. But when they find the right brain map signals, my understanding is it takes 6 to 8 months to map your brain, through a series, and you'll know because stuff will be happening to you. And once they get it, they can control you. And there's a very particular frequency that Robert Duncan, which Ron just mentioned, very important books, Project Soulcatcher, and then The Matrix Deciphered. And The Matrix Deciphered you can find online, I think, in PDF for free. Project Soulcatcher. There's a subtitle. Do you remember the subtitle, Ron?
No, I don't.
Okay, it's Project Soulcatcher subtitle, and it's Robert Duncan, and you can buy that on Amazon. These are two very, very important books. I'm not saying I agree with absolutely every conclusion that Robert Duncan draws. He doesn't go into the spiritual aspect. He's very science, but it's unprecedented science. And of course, in his case, it's compartmentalized as well, so he's revealing what's coming, and he doesn't have all the information that some others of us know that a lot of this has already been actualized and used. But very important books.
Definitely.
So yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. I kind of forgot what.
I just wanted to know if people like some of these high-profile assassins,
Yeah,
these Sirhans or this John Holmes from the Dark Knight shooting, if
absolutely.
you saw similarities in their situations that did point to them being mind controlled.
Sometimes, for me, like in the case, you remember the Jared Lee Loughner in Tucson a few
Yes.
years ago?
Mm-hmm.
When I saw his picture, I knew. I didn't even know what the story was. And then I got into the story, and yeah, there were very particular things, and it's kind of hard to explain because it's that Twilight language.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've heard the term, but it's not always like so obvious.
Yes.
You know, like, okay, yeah, he had a 9mm. I actually have an altar that was programmed. That's her gun. I mean, she's 9mm is the gun she shoots. And you see a 9mm a lot in a lot of these cases. They either had one or have access or had one at the house or whatever. So there's those real physical things, but there's other things. There's little things that either barely get mentioned or they get mentioned once and then you never see them again in the articles, and what they were doing before they did what they did, what they were talking about, certain words they said, all kinds of things. And then, like Sirhan, I mean, some of the cases are saying, basically saying after they get thrown in jail, they're telling people about their programming, basically, without really being able to describe it. And that's how it looks. It's once you know what to look for. And as far as Aurora and the Black Knight stuff, Ron knows this. I mean, I had already sent my book out, and I talk about my Black Knight programming, my Batman programming, and then John Holmes happened after the fact. As a matter of fact, I think Ilana Freeland went on with Clyde Lewis on Ground Zero and talked about it because she already had the paperwork when the event occurred. So, yeah, it's happening in this latest one of driving into the White House, and she claimed, this woman, Miriam Carey, claimed that the president was monitoring her. There's no doubt in my mind that they hit her with tech from afar and sent her in her car into the fence at the White House.
Yeah,
and
that's a very weird case.
That's what it looks like now. In the non-high level use, they're just picking people out, brain mapping them, and they're up and running in less than a year.
Wow.
For one event, and they're all expendable as far as they're concerned.
Now, another sector where this mind control is talked about a lot is in Hollywood. I mean, with pop stars like Britney Spears and Miley Cyrus, do you see elements in their personalities when you look at them that make you think that they were also put through this type of abuse and control that you're claiming?
Absolutely, and I mean, I know there's some stuff out there that actually shows Britney Spears switching alters on an interview. I mean, it's when you know what to look for. It's not always just in your face. It's sometimes it can be really subtle, especially if they're in the public eye. But she's, and then all the mental breakdowns, all the symbolism. They're half naked. Everybody dresses like whores, and they're all making all the esoteric symbols and devotions to Lucifer and Satan, and it's not entertainment. And I have a chapter in my book called Enter Entrainment. And the entire music and Hollywood industry is a mind control mechanism. And when you understand, I mean, I was actually programmed to an actor, actually two actors. One of them I was programmed to, which is part of this Dark Knight stuff, to go see every movie of his, kind of like, what was it? Ilana said to me after I shared that with her, like Mel Gibson in Conspiracy Theory, the movie where he had to go buy a certain book. Mm-hmm. Well, I was doing that with a movie, and the Batman series. I would have one, and I would compulsively want to buy more. This was when I was in deprogramming, and then there was another actor that I was actually programmed 2 years ago for a potential kill program that never took place, and I had no idea, in deprogramming, why would anyone program me to this actor? Why did they want to kill him? And it turns out he's been a high-level activist for several decades, and I guess caused a lot of trouble for the Bush family as well.
Well, this just got me thinking about the Dark Knight and Christian Bale. I assume is who you're talking about, but
yes.
So could it be possible to mind control someone to go and see every Christian Bale movie, and then there be some deeper trigger that when you see this particular movie, that's when a switch goes off and guns start coming out.
Yes, absolutely. And that's basically what happened with me and the Christian Bale films. I'm obsessively was buying and watching. If it was coming out in the theater, I was like calling the theater and asking them what day, because I had to be there right away. And I had started deprogramming, thank goodness. I had already met the two guys in April, and that summer, Batman Begins came out. And that was the first one that Christian, I think, did with the Dark Knight of the Dark Knight series. And I think it was that one. It may have been the next one. I can't even remember.
Batman Begins, and then The Dark Knight, and then The Dark Knight Rises.
Okay, it may have been The Dark Knight. I think it was The Dark Knight, actually, the first one. And completely set me off. I was driving away from the theater. I was on my cell phone with one of the men that I met in April 2008 has stayed with me. Still we're friends, but he just listened to everything for like 2 years. God bless his soul. I mean, what they put this guy through, but I was on the phone and I was just screaming the rage, and these altars that were surfacing, that I had to kill something. And, I didn't really understand it, but luckily I had already started deprogramming and was aware enough to know that, just go home. And I was, we were on the phone for probably an hour or two, and I was just ranting and pacing and screaming until I calmed down. And I really didn't understand what was happening, but I told him it was this film, and, I get really emotional, and it's this film, and it's this stuff, and this is what's going on, and it's just real fast-paced and frantic.
See, I just want to say that's really interesting, because we just recently talked about on the show that there seems to be manipulation on the actor side as well. Like Jim Carrey is a resonator for the Green Man, or Christian Bale. He seems to be in these kind of strange movies, like of course the Dark Knight movies, but also American Psycho seems to be layered in symbolism as well. So it seems like there's manipulation across the board, and these actors are pawns to create this media that resonates these symbols just as much as you're activated to be triggered by them.
Absolutely, both in the film and the music industry. And I brought Christian Bale forward by programming to him to the two men back in 2008. I don't know when I brought it to him. I worked with them for a little while, and I brought that forward, and that's why I started looking at Christian Bale, and I just did a real superficial look at his life. And I mean, there's so many classic symbols of the esoteric mind control. And now I can't say whether he was actually physically present. I now know that they can put people in my actual programming session with my altars, and I believe it's that person. And It looks like that person to me. And I have a very clear recollection of that programming session with him. And there were actually tables of people on both the left and the right, these men that I call the observers, and they were sitting silently watching us as if we were engaging in real life, but my altar became aware out of the corner of my eye that these men were here, and why were they staring at us? And of course the person, if it was Christian Bale, I honestly can't tell you if it was him or someone that was being presented as him. It looked like him to my altar. But he seemed to be completely unaware of these people on either side of us. So I'm suspecting that they put someone in playing that role for him. But I have no problem believing that Christian Bale, and I do mention this in the book, that I do believe he's programmed. And there's many, many others and some people like myself that have come forward and written books even talk about actors being perpetrators. Some of them they're mind controlled themselves, and they use sex slaves and so forth. So
that was something it's about that time we wrap it up, but I did want to ask you if there were any lesser talked about people that have popped up in media stories or pop culture that you think might also show signs of being victims.
Well, I won't be able to really name specifics, but I can tell you this: the industry, it works like this. You want to be in the industry. You want to be a star. It's like any other ritual realm. You come in, and there's compromises and things you're going to have to do as you start to go up. If you want to be popular, there's things that are demanded of you. And I'm not talking about just rituals, although I think a lot of the high-level music industry and film stars have had to go through actual rituals. I think these people actually have altars. But there's things that you will continually be asked to compromise. And what that does is creates a vulnerability that allows the entry and influence of these malevolent beings. That's how it works. That's why it was done to me. That's why it's done to them, is they are literally put inside you. They become the first line handler. The physical person handler is in addition.
Wow.
Okay? You've got these beings running you. And it happens every time you compromise. When the ego gets in there and, you want to be successful, you want to be powerful, whatever, that is their way in.
Man, it seems like a slippery slope.
It is.
Well, Elisa, this has been a really eye-opening hour for sure. I hope that people found your story as interesting as I did. I really wish you the best of luck in your future.